Hello and welcome to another video game crossover build, this time for everyone's favorite black and yellow clad Pyro Ninja,
Scorpion.
This build ends up being a kind of light armored Pyro Spellsword class with a wide array of offensive and mobility tools. It's very fun to play and capable of some crazy gameplay combos and on-the-fly playstyle switching. The trade-off is that early and mid-game can be really tough on harder difficulty levels since you'll be stretching out offensive perks amongst 3 or 4 different skill trees and subtrees. And without perks in alchemy or smithing, it'll be a challenge to get to the armor cap, or at least something close to it, so survivability also becomes an issue until you get used to using mobility as your main defensive tool. So this build guide is broken up into 8 sections: key mods, race, class, and birthsign, standing stones and religion, attributes and perks, gear, spells, shouts, and transformations, roleplay considerations, and gameplay combos. As always, I've marked each chapter in the description below, so you can skip around as needed. The main mods I used in this build are Ordinator, Triumvirate, and Forgotten Magic Redone. And while not required for this build, I did make use of some other mods for flavor. Animated Armory for the whip animations, Cross and Jab Body Hook for the punching animations, and Unarmed Warfare for the kick animations. And I did also find some useful spells in the Arcanum spell pack. For modded gear, that got a little complicated and kinda all over the place this time, so check that section later on in the guide to find out where all the pieces came from. As always, I've included links to these mods in the description below. For race, I went with Redguard since it comes with some skill bonuses that I could take advantage of, namely one-handed, alteration, block, and destruction. Also, Redguard lore seems at least somewhat inspired by real-life Japanese history from which Scorpion hails in Mortal Kombat. Speaking of skills, the class for this build consists of alteration, block, destruction, enchanting, light armor, and one-handed. While Classic Classes and Birthsigns Reimagined is not required for this build, I always use it these days just to get the class started off strong and to keep the focus on major skills from the very beginning. So if you also use this mod, I recommend taking the Martial Artist class ability, which gives a nice bonus to unarmed damage. This helps much more in the beginning of the playthrough than it does in the end, but that's also when this build needs the most help. For Birthsign, I took the Steed, which imparts a 10% movement speed buff. With the correct Ordinator perks, this translates to another 20% damage boost on unarmed power attacks. I used the Andromeda mod for standing stones, though it's also not required for this build. I switched out between whichever Guardian Stone would give me the experience boost I needed for whichever skills I was trying to level at the time. For one-handed and block skills, I used the Warrior Stone. For alteration, destruction, and enchanting skill leveling, I used the Mage Stone, and for light armor, I used the Thief Stone. I also leveled smithing and alchemy skills for my endgame gear, though I didn't invest any perks in them. I used the Warrior and Thief Stones respectively when leveling those skills. Guardian Stones give an extra 10% experience in the skills under their umbrella. Once all key skills were leveled up to 100, I switched to the Apprentice Stone, which I kept for the rest of the playthrough. This allows you to cast novice spells for free, which is great in a pinch, but it also gives you a 50% boost to the power of each spell 75% of the time, with the trade-off that they are 50% weaker the other 25% of the time. Once all other stones have been discovered, the Apprentice Stone also gives you a power that will vaporize any enemy that would otherwise have landed a killing blow on you once per day. For religion, I landed on Mehrunes Dagon, who basically just immolates random enemies during combat. This gives Scorpion's Hellfire a bit of a mind of its own, which I thought was a cool little wrinkle to give that ability a bit of its own identity. The attribute spread I used for this build was 1 point in Magicka, 2 in health, and 2 in stamina for every 5 levels. This kept us alive and kicking for a few hits at least on legendary difficulty. One thing to keep in mind is that there are perks in the light armor skill tree that allow you to scale damage output with current stamina levels, making that attribute even more important. As with pretty much all builds, once you feel like you're in a comfortable spot with magicka and or stamina, you can start funneling those points into health for much needed survivability on higher difficulty levels. For perks, I did manage to get Scorpion into fighting shape with just 50 of them. Though with his wide and varied toolbox, he's very well served by leveling even higher. Starting with Alteration, I only took 3 perks. I started with just 1 rank in Alteration Mastery to help reduce the cost of the Pull Through Shadows spell. Everything else in the Alteration School will be cast automatically through Okado's Recital, so the second rank wasn't necessary and better spent elsewhere. Next, I took the Alter Self Resistances perk and chose Fire and Frost Resistances for added defense against dragons. And the last perk I took in this tree was the Alter Self Attributes perk. This one really depends on what you need more of when you take it. There's a strong argument to be made for stamina, since unarmed damage scales with it in Ordinator, but I ended up going with health since I was struggling a bit for survivability at that moment. And on to block, I took both ranks in the Mastery perk, the more damage reduction the better. Next, I took the Deflect Arrows perk, which helps a bit with archers, but really I just wanted to get to the Dominion perk. In Mortal Kombat, you get a block button, which works for attacks from both sides, and this perk helps to reflect that mechanic. I also took both ranks of the Timed Block perk. This helps a ton with Scorpion's defense in the game, and also helps reflect the flawless block mechanic in Mortal Kombat 11. On that same train of thought, I took the Poke the Dragon perk, which helps to reflect the greater rewards you get in Mortal Kombat for performing a flawless block. For the Destruction tree, I started with both ranks of the Destruction Mastery perk. This will strengthen our fire spells and make them cheaper to cast. I also took both ranks of Combustion, which makes our Hellfire more powerful the less health our opponent has. Next, I took Scarring Burns, which makes each fire spell reduce the fire resistance of the target. This is really important since flame spells are the only destruction spells Scorpion will use, and this gives us a way to deal with resistant enemies like dragons. Finally, I took the Flash Fire perk, which has a small chance to ignite an enemy, and then when hit with the next instance of fire damage, it will detonate, causing more damage and a fear effect. I found this useful for dragons, which I'd pelt with constant flame spells, just for some more damage against the resistant lizards. Enchanting was also very important for this build, since it's the only crafting skill that I perked into. So it'll do some heavy lifting to fortify our defense, damage output, and to fortify the rest of our crafting skills. I started with both ranks of the Enchanting Mastery skills for stronger enchantments. I also took the Gem Dust perk to get some use out of those flawless gems we'll find. I took Regalia mostly to unlock the next perks, but the stronger enchantments on clothing, circlets, and necklaces are very useful for crafting gear when it comes to tempering weapons and armor and mixing potions with no perk support. Attunement makes existing enchantments stronger. This is very useful for fortify one-handed and light armor enchantments, since we won't be able to temper our equipment much. Twin Enchantments gives us double the enchantment slots on our gear, and Arcane Nexus gives us a final boost to new enchantment strength. Light armor is perhaps the most important skill for this build, since it provides our primary means of damage output in the unarmed subtree and our secondary means of defense after block, providing our armor rating. So it's not surprising that I've taken more perks here than in the other skills. I started with Light Armor Mastery for more armor rating and more experience in the skill. And then I went into the unarmed subtree as soon as possible. Iron Fist increases unarmed damage based on current stamina, and I took all 3 ranks of that. This one also grants you light armor experience with each unarmed strike. I also took Sweeping Wind, which gives power attacks more damage, plus bonus damage equal to 2 times the percentage of your boosted speed in combat. This synergizes with the Windrunner perk and any movement speed enchantments on your gear. Rushing Tide was the next perk I took, which gives increased stamina regen for higher powered unarmed strikes through the Iron Fist perk, but it also gives you a stacking movement speed buff, which boosts power attack damage with the Sweeping Wind perk. Breaking Waves gives a boosted chance of a critical strike that scales with your current stamina. This synergizes with the War Dancer perk, which we'll also be taking, making all strikes critical until you're hit with an unblocked attack. I also made Light Armor Fit a priority since it gives a nice boost to armor rating. And then I took the Unhindered perk, though I'm not sure it was necessary. Endgame gear will boost our movement speed quite a bit, making this less important. But mobility is great for this build, and this is nice to have while you look for that enchantment. The Initiative perk is a great one to take for this build, as it gives a nice stamina regen boost at the beginning of fights, which is important for continued unarmed damage output. I only took one rank, but it's hard to argue against taking both here. Lightning Strike greatly increases the damage of your critical strikes, which synergizes nicely with the War Dancer perk that guarantees critical strikes until you're hit. Windrunner makes you 10% faster in combat, which translates to a 20% unarmed power attack damage boost with the Sweeping Wind perk. War Dancer is an amazing perk that synergizes with a few other perks in this tree. It boosts critical strike damage and guarantees all attacks are crits until you get hit. I also took the Spell Dancer perk, which applies War Dancer's damage boost to elemental destruction spells as well. Finally, I took Keen Senses, but mostly just for aesthetic purposes. The yellow cowl I wanted to use for Scorpion's look is unarmored in my game, and I needed this perk in order to get the rest of the bonuses in the tree while keeping the end game look I was going for. The final tree I perked into was the one-handed skill tree. This applies to both Scorpion's katana and his rope spear, for which I used Animated Armory's whip weapon type. The whip type in that mod piggybacks off of the vanilla mace type for perk purposes. Obviously, you'll want to take both ranks of one-handed mastery for damage output. I took the Furious Strength perk for stronger power attacks, but mostly for the decaps, which unlocks the Mortal Kombat mainstay, Fatalities. Disciplined Fighter is a good perk to take for this build, since I did make heavy use of the power attack perks in both sword and mace trees. This perk makes power attacks cheaper, so you can perform them more often. With Denting Blows, our whip attacks reduce the armor rating of our enemies, softening them up for our powerful unarmed attacks. Smite strengthens our whip's power attacks with a guaranteed crit and bonus damage to undead. In the sword subtree, I took Clash of Champions, which reduces enemies' attack damage for a bit, making Scorpion's katana his go-to weapon for defensive situations. And finally, I took Crosscut, which strengthens the normal to power attack combination, which is so deadly with swords. The gear I ended up with was a massive hodgepodge of pieces from many different mods. If you're trying to recreate this exact look, you have your work cut out for you. Otherwise, just go with whatever you think looks best. Let me know in the comments what mashups you used, or if you found a good Scorpion armor mod somewhere. With the Twin Enchantment perk, I was able to get 2 effects on each piece. The hood is the yellow cowl, which comes from the WACCF mod. It simply splits the hood from the yellow robes in the base game and makes it its own headpiece. It's unarmored, meaning you'll need to get the Keen Senses perk from the light armor tree in order to get most of the bonuses there. And I placed the Fortify Destruction and Fortify Magicka regen enchantments on this piece. The chest piece is the Alakir armor from the Unplayable Faction Armor's SSE mod. I put the Fortify Light Armor effect on this piece along with the Reactive Barrier effect from Summer Mist. The gloves are from the Outcast Shen LE mod. This one needs to be manually converted because the mod author hasn't allowed others to post it for SE. But the process is fairly simple. Just look up how to convert LE mods to SE on YouTube. It's a great looking set and well worth a bit of extra work in my opinion. I put another Fortify Light Armor effect on these, as well as a Fortify One-Handed effect. You might consider a Fortify Unarmed enchantment on the gloves, but in my experience it wasn't needed and the one-handed damage output needed more help. The boots are the Armored Radovid boots from the Divine Elegance mod. I put a movement speed enchantment on them from the Summer Mist mod, which also increases unarmed power attack damage with the perks I've chosen. And I applied another reactive barrier enchantment from the same mod for extra elemental protection against dragons and mages. On the amulet, I placed the amplified destruction effect from Summer Mist, as well as yet another fortified light armor effect. With the lack of an armored headpiece and no perk investment in the smithing or alchemy trees, it was very difficult to reach the armor cap with this gear, so these fortified light armor effects become very important. The ring is the Warlock's ring from the free Fishing Creation Club DLC that came with the AE update. This is a great piece that gives us an added magical ward when we block, since you can block magical projectiles in Mortal Kombat. It also gives a boost to health regen, which is always helpful, and another movement speed buff, which also strengthens unarmed power attacks. The mask comes from the Black Sacrament armor mod. It does add an extra slot on top of the vanilla loadout, so you might consider this a little cheaty, but in my opinion this build needs all the help it can get for play on legendary difficulty. Regardless of how you feel about that, the mask is basically required in my opinion for aesthetics at the very least. On the mask I put another Amplify Destruction enchantment, as well as another Fortify Magicka regen effect. These effects are invaluable for ranged dragon fights. The katana is the Sorrow katana from Immersive Weapons. Both the aesthetic and the name fit really well with the character's source material, as Scorpion is looking for revenge after his beloved family and students were killed by a rival guild. On the sword, I put the Lingering Fire effect from Summer Mist, as well as the Threshold Throw effect from the same mod. The Lingering Fire effect works really well with some of the perks in the Destruction tree, including when an enemy under the Ignite effect is damaged with another fire effect. And the Threshold Throw enchantment kind of works like a combo launcher in Mortal Kombat. The Rope Spear, or Whip, comes from Animated Armory. I use the Skyforge Steel Whip, though a case could be made for any piece that is shiny and metallic, such as the Nordic Whip. I also put the Lingering Fire effect on this one, and I used the Paralyze effect, which helps to replicate Scorpion's Spear or Harpoon move in the Mortal Kombat games. Check out the gameplay combo section for more on how I did that. Since I put no perks into either smithing or alchemy, a set of crafting gear with powerful enchantments was extremely important. One pro tip here is to collect every Drow Wax, Stoneflower Petal, and Gold Cannet ingredient you find at Khajiit caravans. These ingredients come from the Rare Curios creation, which comes free with the AE update. They come with built-in boosts to their Fortify Alchemy and Smithing effects by a factor of 200% and 25% respectively. With no perk support in alchemy or smithing, these strengthened ingredient boosts are absolutely key to getting your armor rating even remotely close to the engine cap. I'd argue that it's even worth going out of your way to track down the caravans to purchase these ingredients, or even try the punch shopping exploit to reset their inventory to collect them. Now I'll go through the endgame spells I'm using categorized by school, starting with Destruction. Conflagrate is an adept Pyromancer spell from Forgotten Magic Redone. I use this as a general purpose fire projectile that can be upgraded to cause a knockdown effect, useful for comboing into unarmed attacks for very high damage. This one matches Scorpion's Hellflame special move from Mortal Kombat 11, which also causes a nice stagger, and even a full combo with the enhanced version. The FMR perks I took for this one are Ignite, which gives a chance to ignite the target for 5 seconds, Impact, which gives a chance to knock the target down, Flame Strike, which makes each consecutive conflagration spell deal 10% more damage for 6 seconds, stacking up to 3 times, Dehydration, which consumes the Ignite status of the enemy if it exists and stuns them, and Ember Storm, which deals twice as much damage if the enemy is affected by Ignite. Blazing Soul is a very interesting novice level destruction spell from the Arcanum spell mod. It has a stacking buff to damage output and movement speed with each fire spell you cast. This synergizes well with Conflagrate mentioned above. Pelt the enemy with that spell until you get the knockdown, then move in with buffed unarmed attacks on a defenseless enemy, boosted both from the attack damage increase from this spell and the movement speed attack bonus from the Sweeping Wind perk. This one doesn't have a Mortal Kombat equivalent, but the synergies with the playstyle is just too good to ignore. I also hooked this one up to Okado's Recital. Phoenix Strike is another Forgotten Magic Redone spell that is actually a minor power. As such, it costs no magicka to cast, but it does operate on a 30-second cooldown, so it can't be abused. I've also found the spellbook for this to be very rare in the loot tables, so you may consider using the console to cheat this one into your inventory if you're not finding it. This one matches Scorpion's iconic Hellport teleport special move from Mortal Kombat, and leaving it out would have been a sin in my opinion. The FMR perks I took for this one are Flame Rupture, which deals a nice chunk of damage to enemies that are immune to the knockdown effects of this power, somewhat making up for the lack of combo damage you can inflict on a defenseless enemy. Burning Fury, which reduces the cooldown of the power by 10 seconds, allowing you to use it much more often. Scorch, which applies Ignite status to the target on impact, synergizing with Conflagrate perks above. Molten Skin, which reflects 100% of the melee damage taken back to the attacker for 10 seconds. And Blazing Speed, which increases movement speed by 50% for 10 seconds, boosting unarmed attack damage by 100% with the Sweeping Wind unarmed light armor perk from Ordinator. Moving on now to Alteration, I used the Ebony Flesh vanilla spell to shore up defenses. As mentioned previously, I did have some issue hitting the armor cap with this build, so I needed to rely on a flesh spell to reach a level of protection that made play on legendary difficulty viable. I hooked this one up to Okado's Recital to be auto-cast when entering battle. Pull Through Shadows is an expert triumvirate shadow spell which pulls targets at a distance into melee range. Using this spell in the offhand with a whip in the main hand was the closest I could come to Scorpion's iconic Spear special move. It ends up a little hacky, but was a necessity for this build in my opinion. More on this in the gameplay combo section later on. Shadow Dance is another shadow spell in Triumvirate, this time Adept level. It triggers an extremely quick dash whenever you jump, providing elite mobility in combat. This one helps to convey Scorpion's mobility prowess in Mortal Kombat 11, which is second to none, and especially matches up with his hellport cancel ability. This is the third and final spell I had hooked up to Okado's recital. And just a quick word of warning on this one, if you have any script lag in your game, it could cause this effect not to fire once in a while when you jump. And finally, just to have it all in one place, the final alteration spell I used for this build was Okado's recital. It's an adept level spell included in the Apocalypse spell pack and allows you to hook up 3 spells to be triggered automatically whenever you enter combat. For this build, I hooked up Blazing Soul for the perfect synergies between fire spells, movement speed, and attack damage output, Ebony Flesh for the much needed armor rating, and Shadow Dance for the truly next level mobility in combat. For shouts, I really only use the good old Fire Breath shout. You can boost this shout a bit by meditating on the word Yol with Parthenax. Also, I'm running the Thunderchild mod, which provides several ways of strengthening shouts, such as donating to the Greybeards, shouting at the sky every day, and culling animals in the wilderness that Kine points out to you. You can also augment this shout with the combustion perks in Ordinator's Destruction Tree, and with Ozadal's Mask in Solstheim. The Black Book, Apostolary Acumen, causes fireworms to appear from enemies defeated with a fire shout. It's not much of a boost effectively, but does add some power to the shout. I highly suggest taking these options whenever available, since alongside your other offensive tools, the vanilla shout ends up being a bit underpowered, especially on legendary difficulty. However, with these boosts, you do have a viable weapon to add to your toolkit. This one matches Scorpion's Demon Breath special move in Mortal Kombat 11, as well as his Toasty fatality in the original game. Toasty! I didn't end up using any transformations for this build. I did play around with vampirism a bit to help reflect Scorpion's undead status, but he's really not a vampire, he's a specter. He doesn't need to feed on blood or even souls to sustain himself, and a Pyromancer from hell that has a passive weakness to fire just doesn't add up to me, especially for this build. So I ended up curing vampirism and going without it for the rest of the playthrough. Roleplay considerations for this build might go much deeper than you'd expect from something that was inspired by an arcade game. The cornerstones of the narrative for this character are that Scorpion's family and students were slaughtered by a rival guild. Fueled by rage and unmitigated hunger for revenge, he fights his way out of oblivion to return to Nirn as a specter, hunting down the culprit to face them in... The details are up to you here, but you'll want to win some renown in the province, set up a guild, and recruit some students. Maybe get married and adopt some kids. Then, for the attack, you'll want to decide who the enemy is and whether they're a single actor or a faction. Map out your revenge and the steps it'll take to complete this leg of the journey. Once vengeance is yours, decide what it'll take for Scorpion to start regaining some semblance of his humanity. Does he help save Nirn from the vampires? Or discover his dragon blood and save Tamriel from Alduin? The choice is yours. For my playthrough, I had Hanzo, Scorpion's human name, earn notoriety as a legionnaire helping to end the Civil War. Then he joined the Companions and became Harbinger, becoming known as one of the greatest warriors in Skyrim. Then, tragedy struck while he was away on a mission, and Hanzo found a single Dark Brotherhood cowl among the dead. Then I did the Cause AE questline, followed by the Consequences questline, fighting my way out of Oblivion and being reborn as the Spectre Scorpion. Scorpion then destroys the Dark Brotherhood, and his vengeance is complete. From there, I did the main questline, fulfilling the prophecy as Dragonborn, saving Tamriel from the dragons and regaining at least a portion of his humanity. Feel free to play around with the narrative and take some creative liberties, as this is what will make your playthrough unique. Scorpion's iconic Spear special move has him using his rope dart as a harpoon, pulling his enemies in close and opening them up to a powerful barrage of attacks. This one was challenging to reproduce in Skyrim even with mod support. My first thought was to hook up Triumvirate's Pull Through Shadows spell to Spellscribe so that it would trigger on the whip's power attack. However, it appears as if the Pull Through Shadows spell works more like a rune with a splash effect only and no direct effect on target NPCs, so it's sadly incompatible with Spellscribe. So now I just cast Pull Through Shadows the old-fashioned way from my left hand and whack the enemy with the whip in my right hand. As described in the gear section earlier, the whip is enchanted with the lingering fire effect, so the enemy burns for the entirety of the fight, and with paralysis, which is a vanilla effect that is applied randomly. So for this combo, you'll want to cast Pull Through Shadows on a distant enemy, bringing them in close. Then immediately hit them with a regular whip attack, cancelled into a power attack, which gives you 6 times critical damage with rank 2 of the Smite perk. If the enemy has not yet been paralyzed with your whip enchantment, jump back using Shadow Dance, autocast through Okado's Recital, to gain some more distance and try it again. If the enemy is paralyzed at this point, switch to unarmed and approach the defenseless enemy for a full power attack barrage with both hands causing massive damage. If you're not surrounded by enemies at this point, you should be able to easily finish this one off. This ends up being an extremely fun and potent combo that I used throughout the playthrough. Try it out. The other iconic special move in Scorpion's arsenal is the hellport ability, which teleports him behind the enemy for a devastating attack. The key spell I use for this is Phoenix Strike from Forgotten Magic Redone, which zips your character to the target enemy and pops them up into the air, leaving them open for a barrage of attacks. It also features some nice flame effects which mirror the ability in the Mortal Kombat game. The spell also includes unlockable perks that can be used to further strengthen the combo. See the spell section earlier for more info on that. To perform this combo, we start by casting the Phoenix Strike power on the enemy. Scorpion dashes to his target, ending in an explosion, and the opponent is launched into the air like a fleshy piñata. Next, you'll want to switch to your katana, which has a lingering fire damage effect enchanted onto it, so the enemy will continue to take burn damage for the remainder of combat. See the gear section for more info on this blade. You'll want to now approach the enemy, likely now grounded, and hit them with a regular attack, cancelled by a power attack for more damage with the crosscut perk. Finally, switch to unarmed and finish the combo off with a two-handed power attack. I'd be shocked if the enemy is still alive at this point, but if they are, jump back with Shadow Dance to get some more space, and maybe go for the spear combo described previously while you wait for the cooldown to reset on Phoenix Strike. This is another potent combo that is really fun and quite the spectacle when you pull the full thing off against a powerful enemy. Used in conjunction with the spear combo, you'll be clearing dungeons in fiery style. So that does it for another Skyrim crossover build. This one went pretty deep and was quite a challenge, requiring lots of different perks from lots of different trees and lots of different spells and items from lots of different mods. It took some time, but I think I succeeded with a fun and viable build that fits the bill at level 50. Not gonna lie, I'm really proud of this one. If you liked the vid, then please like the vid. And don't forget to subscribe for more. Take care and see you next time.